I am thrilled to have Kay Yang on with us. She is a deprogrammer, which I, too, did not know even exists. She is the creator of StopFemaleErasure.com. She is truly amazing. She exposes the intersections of corporate, government, nonprofit collusion driving the transgender rights movement. She says a smokescreen for massive social engineering and propaganda war being used to facilitate female erasure in language, in law, and on a worldwide scale. Her work connects the dots between normalized practices of child sexualization and proliferation of biopharmaceutical transhumanist technologies. Man, I am going to love this woman. And frames these agendas as foundational to the colonization of the female body and the female reproductive control. Kay, welcome to the program.
Wow, thank you so much, Glenn, for having me here and for this opportunity. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm so glad to have you on. Let me make sure I have your background right. 10 years ago, when none of us were talking about this stuff, you were working at an LGBT center?
That's right, I was. In my early 20s is when I was working at an LGBT center. It was a small local nonprofit, and the funding was coming from the New York State Department of Health. So that's a really important part of this as well, that the state was funding me to do the work that I was doing. We were indoctrinating public school children with gender identity and transgender ideology. So we were actually being armed with rainbow-colored propaganda that was sent to us from these large nonprofits like GLSEN and GLAAD, and then we'd go into the schools, disarm the teachers really with these themes around acceptance, anti-bullying, suicide prevention, and then we would introduce children to the concept of gender identity and transgender. And we would use propaganda tools like the genderbread person, which you may have seen before, but your audience might not all be familiar with. It's a cartoon cookie character, and it teaches children to measure themselves and others by so-called womanness or manness or femaleness or maleness. So we would take tools like this into the schools with us. We would visit local area high schools and set up LGBT clubs and gay straight alliances.
And wait, hang on just a second, Kay, hang on just a second.
Sure.
You got into the schools and the teachers were disarmed, assuming they had a problem. They were disarmed because you were coming in under the umbrella of the New York State Division of Family and Children Counseling, right? So you were coming in with state approval.
That's right. And we were in there kind of under the idea of sexual health and education, even though we were not experts. I had never been trained in sexual health, but I was considered an expert the moment that I took the job. I was billed as an expert to the teachers. And we were talking to these students without the knowledge, without their parents' consent. You know, parents didn't know that we were having these after-school clubs. They didn't know that we were talking about sex, talking about sexuality, trans identities, and gender identity with these students. There was no knowledge or consent from parents. And this was all considered okay.
Okay, all right. So
this is 10 years ago.
This is you 10 years ago. What brought you from that to somebody who is helping parents deprogram their children? What changed in you? What was the moment that you were like, oh, crap, I'm on the wrong side?
Well, a lot of things. A lot of things. As soon as I saw this concept of a trans child, this was really concerning to me because at the time when I was working at the LGBT Center, I had no idea that the work that we were doing was really paving the way for the manufacturing of the so-called trans child, and also for people to accept this idea, right? Or that there would be medicalization or sterilization of healthy children in their bodies.
Right.
None of this was ever part of the work that we were doing. It never crossed my mind that this would be a thing. So yeah, 10 years ago, no one had ever heard of a trans child, But in 2019, the CDC did a survey, and it was claimed that 1 out of every 50 high school students in America was identifying as trans. So that's a huge increase.
Yes.
And and a lot of the reporting news media has attributed that the increase to children feeling safe to come out and to them having like better data collection, but it's never attributed to this widespread social engineering that was going on. And as soon as I heard this concept of a trans child, this was extremely alarming to me. Because if you went back in time and told me that what we were doing at the LGBT Center would result in like this near future where 3, 4, 5, 6-year-old children are being paraded in front of international media, openly sexualized and groomed, you know, these drag kids, drag queen story time, I never would have believed this. And really, there's no such thing as a trans child, and this becomes really obvious when you look back only 1 decade to a time when no one had heard of a trans child. It's corporate fiction. It's propaganda. No child is born in the wrong body. No person, whether an adult or a child, can change their sex. It doesn't really matter. You know, anything you do, you can put on makeup, you can change your clothes, you can, you know, drug yourself up with chemicals and wrong sex hormones, or have these, you know, really invasive, medically unnecessary procedures, but it's never going to change the fact that a boy is a boy and a girl is a girl. So we have to stop lying to children. And when I saw that this so-called movement, it's not a real movement, but when I saw this turn towards the focus on children and telling children that they could be born in the wrong body and moving them on a path towards, you know, medicalization, this really shocked me and scared me.
So, because you're into the transhumanist movement and everything we'll talk about a little bit later, I just want to make sure we're on the same page. I believe that we are living in a time where a lot of people are useful idiots, and a lot of the people that believe, you know, in the stuff that you were teaching. A lot of them might be really well-intentioned and believe that, you know, this is really something, you know, whatever. But there is, I said last hour, I don't know why liberals won't wake up, because liberals were right, conservatives were wrong. The liberals were the ones saying the United States government is just colluding with corporations, and eventually it's going to be one giant corporation. I think the collusion between the government and, you know, in this case, pharmaceutical companies or whatever, that collusion is what's really, truly driving all of this stuff. And they are using these organizations, and these organizations are going to be chewed up in the end is the minute they stop becoming a shill for the system, government and business. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of people, there being like a lot of useful idiots, I agree, because I was one of those useful idiots, you know. I was thinking that what I was doing was a good thing. It was the right thing. I thought my beliefs were correct and they were morally superior. And now I know that I was wrong. And part of how I know that I was wrong is because I really started investigating the money behind what was pushing this movement.
And
and I have to.
Where does that lead?
Well, you know, there's a lot of collusion going on, because when I worked at the LGBT nonprofit, I didn't really think of it at the time. It was later in my life when I started investigating money behind other social movements that I realized that I could like take this analysis and apply it to the work I was doing at the LGBT nonprofit. So then I started to realize, like, wait a second, I was being paid by New York State to go into public schools to indoctrinate them with materials that were coming from large nonprofit organizations like Glisten and GLAAD, and those organizations are partnering with the government and with foundations and the private sector. And all of this is being done to push this propaganda and target our children in the public school system.
And you say this is to erase the female.
Well, yes, that is really foundational to this entire thing. First and foremost, they want to disrupt our sense of self and erase the division between the sexes, because human beings are a sexually dimorphic species. There's males and there's females, and everybody who does not fall into male or female, well, they actually still do. They have hormonal differences or chromosomal differences, but they still fall into one of the two. We're dimorphic. But this is being erased in our reality right now, and children are being taught that sex is a spectrum. Even the World Health Organization has recently, and they're part of the United Nations, the World Health Organization recently said that they're going to be expanding their definition of sex, and that they want to expand it to include people with trans and gender diverse identities.
So I want to ask you, I'm going to take a 1 minute break, then I'm going to come back, and I want to ask you what their motivation is for this, and then I want to get into your background of China and the Red Guard and the revolution that happened there is a lot like it is here. And then we'll talk about deprogramming our kids coming up in just a second. Okay, so we're talking to Kay Yang. She is a deprogrammer, and you can find her website, stopfemaleerasure.com. So, Kay, the only thing that really makes sense to me is that this is a Malthusian / Marxist kind of movement that is really anti-human at its core. It's evil. They're breaking up the family and everything else. Why do you think, what is the motivation for these people to do this to our children?
Yeah, thank you. So right before the break, I was just talking about how there's this desexing of our bodies that's going on. They're breaking down the boundaries between the two sexes. And, when there is a quote unquote movement that is sterilizing children and desexing our reality in the name of, gender identity, this is genocide. This is a usurping of, what they're really trying to do is usurp female reproductive control. And we're facing this attempted takeover of the ownership of the human body, of human biology, but really the focus is on the woman's body and the woman's womb and all of these, miraculous, unique bits and moving pieces and parts of the female body that make pregnancy and birth possible. So this is really about controlling reproduction and birth on this planet. And we're moving into or we're already in the fourth industrial revolution.
Yes.
Klaus Schwab has his whole book about it. And the fourth industrial revolution really demands the erasure of the sex-based rights and realities of females. And this is under the guise of LGBT inclusion. Now, at the same time, they are erasing us in language and in law. They're simultaneously exploiting the very nature of female reproductive biology. And this is happening through the implementation of new technologies like external wombs. For example, they already have in Philadelphia at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, they already were growing lamb fetuses in plastic
in bags. I know. It's
right. And now they're in the process of getting FDA approval for a biobag device to grow human babies in.
I don't know how I didn't know about UK in advance. You are so spot on. And the fact that you have 10 years ago were on the opposite side, what Klaus Schwab and the WEF are doing, the World Economic Forum, with the Great Reset, is so anti-human, and it is about population control. Almost everything they're doing is about population control. So you are now in a place where, tell me your experience with China and what you're seeing, the parallels from China.
Yes. So, I just want to be clear because I think there was a little bit of miscommunication. I'm not actually from China. I was born in New York City.
Oh, okay.
It's my mother's family that's from China, and they were forced to flee China during the Cultural Revolution.
Okay, good. Well, they saw it and left.
Yes, and I want to talk about that a little bit in terms of the intergenerational communication. There's this whole culture of shame and silence for survivors, and it's really led to a complete loss of communication between the generations. Like, the narrative is just not there. And this is a really well-known and documented cultural stigma where, like, people who have lived through it, the older generations who are really dying out right now, they don't talk about it. And it's customary that you're not supposed to ask any questions. I remember when I was a child and I wanted to know more about my family's history, and I would innocently ask questions or just out of curiosity, and I was told not to ask or say anything because it's bringing up something painful, and it created a blanket of silence and shame and really confusion over the whole thing.